Hello, hi everyone. Good morning, afternoon, good night. Let's start today with the Dev Day 2020. We will start with a quick Civil 3D update on the API. And right after that, my colleague Mikako and Sasha will start with the Revit API update on the 8:15 a.m. So let's start with the Civil 3D side. So as a quick overview of these 2 weeks. So Tuesday, we had the Dev Day keynote presentation from Jim Fonsi. Yesterday, we did a Forge update on the Forge side in the APIs, the Forge. Today is about Revit and Civil. And next week, we have Inventor, Vault, and Fusion on Tuesday. On the 4th Wednesday, we have a BIM 360 API update, and next Thursday, the AutoCAD and Design Automation for AutoCAD APIs update. So be sure to attend the other ones if you're looking for specific information. Today with the Civil 3D, it's important to also take a look at the AutoCAD. Most of the Civil 3D applications are hosted on AutoCAD, so it's relevant as well. Okay, so today we are talking about a few, most of the topics today are new and future features on Civil 3D. So it's important to remember that those features are not available on the product's not released yet, and please do not make any decisions based on the presentation today. So then the next release of Civil 3D, the code name is rattlesnake, and there are a few points of interest. So this presentation is to highlight the relevant new features on the API, but also the main area of focus coming on the product on the API. It's about the pressure pipes, and on the product side, one of the goals for this release is to improve the pressure pipe feature, to provide customers an easier and smarter pressure pipe design workflow, and having a workflow that is a focus on layout and profile design, while in the long-term unified workflow with the pursuit for both pressure and gravity pipe design to have a similar experience on those two. So gravity pipe is available for a long time. Also pressure pipe, but now for 2020, the pressure pipe API, it's one big addition. This API, on the 2021 pressure pipe API, we're just releasing the first piece of that API. It's not complete. We may need one more version to complete the work on all the features and objects and methods we need. But on this version, we're exposing all feature settings and command settings for pressure network features. Also the styles for pressure pipe, including how to access that with the .NET API, of course. Labels for pipe fitting and profiles and section views. Also, most of the properties that are available on the UI, on the dialogues and property window can be accessed through the API, including also part list, part size objects also exposed. So they did a very interesting work on exposing all those features on the product, and they are available on the product, but also on the API. Other than that, one new feature is about pipe run feature, and that is also exposed on the API. So this feature is being introduced on the product and available on the product, on the API, sorry. We can create and remove, just that the modification will not be supported just yet. So that's the quick new features. If you have an application running with Civil 3D, just some migration basics on how to get it running on the next release. So the major version for AutoCAD and the base AutoCAD is changed to R24. We will need Visual Studio 2019 with the version 16 or later, .NET Framework 4.8, and the toolset version 2.142. If you have a application bundle working on for your application, make sure to migrate that to R24, and that will be supported on the autoloader. There is no changes on the DWG DXF format, and just like all the other versions for AutoCAD and Civil for a long time, it's only 64-bit. Only 64-bit is supported. Next, just to look a bit on how Civil is fitting with Forge. We have something on Forge called design automation, which is a way for us to process files on the cloud and automate processes. The interesting piece about design automation, the API in general, is that you can get a file from many different sources, including BIM 360, Box, etc. Send that file to the to the engine on the cloud and generate some outputs from that file. Let's say you want to open a DWG file and extract some information or modify that file or create new entities. This is available as part of design automation already with AutoCAD, Inventor, Revit, and 3D Max. But we are working to have Civil 3D also onboarding on this on Forge. And here's just a quick 2 videos showing how that could work, 2 examples. So the first one is using this engine on the cloud to open the DWG drawing, extract styling information, and make that available on Forge, online. So as I click on this entity on the screen, I can see all the properties already available. This is the same viewer as the viewer in BIM 360, but I have this new section here with styling information that was not available before. And I'm using design automation to extract that information. The next sample is kind of similar, but similar UI, but using design automation to export that drawing to land XML. In this case, the surface information is being extracted. And it shows that one can automate the process or have a UI that is not on the product to extract land XML or automatically extract that information and send to a different system, for instance. So it's just a way to automate that process. And this feature is not available in design automation, but because it's still under development, but we're looking for customers that use Civil 3D APIs, Civil 3D workflows, and want to automate those tasks. If you're interested in being part of this beta, please send me a message and we can discuss the workflow you have, if that's supported, and how to get you on board. Let me move to the next slide here. Okay, so to summarize, as I said, today is about Revit and Civil 3D. Next week we have Inventor, BIM, and AutoCAD, BIM 360 and AutoCAD. Make sure to attend those classes, and that should be it. Questions, and you have the Q&A panel to ask your questions, or you can also ask us to open a microphone for you. Questions going once. So there is a question here: how can I export BIM 360 Revit file parameter values to Excel? So this is Revit specific. Sasha is going to start on that. If you're talking about file parameters, that's probably one of the samples we have on extracting parameters. We do have a few samples using Forge mod derivative and Forge design automation. I would recommend you to go to send this question to forge.help@autodesk.com or post that question on Stack Overflow using the Autodesk-Forge tag. So one of my team can send you the links for the samples we have on that. Okay, one more question. On the sample for design automation, they use three-legged to open, upload. Do you have any sample that use two-legged? This next question is about, is really specific on Forge and how to upload and download a file. Again, I would suggest you to send a message to Forge help, forge.help@autodesk.com or Stack Overflow. We can send you the samples on that. It should work the same way to use two-legged or three-legged. You just have to provide the X user ID, but the APIs will behave exactly the same. But again, as this is very specific on Forge, please send a message to Stack Overflow or Forge help. So one more question is about the Excel export. We don't have a step-by-step on it. We just have the sample. The sample we have on Excel is actually using a extension-like application. We have the same kind of code in .NET. And again, it's just, I can just point you to the samples if you send us a message. We have a few, 2 or 3 samples on Excel export. Next one is, can you elaborate more on API pipe pressure design? Can you elaborate more on API for pipe pressure? Well, so that's a .NET API to create and manipulate pressure pipe network on Civil 3D. The objects we will have for pressure pipe are kind of the same kind of objects we have for gravity pipes. And the features are very, similar, the way we can manipulate pipes and parts and structures. I think the only difference is that they work with a different type of object, right, which was not available before. So, but the methods I mentioned on the presentation are just the main overview of what's available. As soon as the product is released, or if you have access to the beta, you can see the object and all the available properties and methods. So you just sent me a video. I will not open it right now, but if just because of the presentation, Sasha, maybe we can just check on that later after I finish here.
Yeah, if you have a Bemis 360 API question, we have another session next week, and also we can take questions like the Augusto said in Stack Overflow or forge.help at Autodesk. So that might be the good one for at least for this moment.
Yes. So Viru, should I stop recording or keep it running?
Keep it running is fine. We'll just hand over things to Sasha to continue, I believe.
So stop sharing. You have the floor.
Okay, Sasha. We still have 1 minute.
I'm here. I'm just fighting with my computer. So
okay. Oh, good. Good to hear your voice, Sasha.
Okay. Hopefully this time is not blue screen on me. It's been blue screening every once in a while. So keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Looks like ready to go.
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. So hi, everyone. I am Sasha Crotty, and I am the Revit product manager responsible for Revit platform and services that are built using Revit technology. And I'll be talking to you guys about what's new in the Revit API. So starts working with me. So in terms of things I'm going to cover, I will first cover things that you have to do, changes that are required from previous versions, and then enhancements and additions that we've made to the API. And just as a disclaimer, anything you see here is not a guarantee until we actually ship it. So please don't make purchasing decisions based on what I am presenting. This is all futures. So stepping into breaking changes and things that have been removed, so changes that you'll have to make. First one is that the Revit API is now built using .NET 4.8. So at a minimum, add-ons will need to target that as a .NET version. Another one, and this is more of a request. So we've done quite a bit of work to enable TLS protocol. So if your add-in is communicating with the internet, you will have to probably specify TLS protocol. We have that built into Revit, so we do support 1.1, and 1.2. So if that is all your add-in needs, you don't actually have to specify anything yourself. If you do need to specify a specific security TLS version, please, please, please do not just directly overwrite what Revit has in the global property. Please do a bitwise or logical OR so that it does not override Revit settings. The problem is if you override Revit settings, that means a lot of our tools, things like Revit Cloud Work Sharing, part of Blender 60 Design, will stop working, and we will have very unhappy customers. In terms of other changes, we have gone through and we have made a significant revamp of units in Revit. This is kind of the culmination of a few years of work in terms of pulling Revit unit definitions out of Revit and then kind of putting them back in. So we now support forged schemas for delivering units, and that means that there have been quite a number of changes, especially in the API. But in terms of forged schemas, they're basically JSON schemas for how units are communicated, and then we also contain a default set of units. The reason that we're doing this is for two reasons. First of all, because we actually want to provide libraries for units that allow things like conversions and things like that without having to rewrite it over and over again. We're basically providing one consistent forged library. The other reason that we made this change is it actually allows us to introduce new units in intermediate releases. So we no longer have to wait for a major release of Revit. We can actually publish additional units going in that way. So expect to see additional units as well in Revit going forward. So in terms of classes that are actually affected by this, we now have forged type IDs, and forged type IDs can represent either a unit or a unit symbol or other objects, including unit types. By the way, unit types are now called specs to reduce confusion with unit type IDs. So you see these three new classes, and then we actually have introduced a bunch of methods, utility methods that help you convert from one to the other. Some of those methods are already deprecated because they're purely meant for a transitionary period to make it easy for the conversion. If you guys have questions about units and stuff like that, I recommend posting to the beta, the Revit beta, Revit preview, I guess, and we can help answer them there. And other things, we are changing the cloud model APIs a little bit. So to get a cloud path, now you actually have to specify a region, because we are working on making Revit Cloud Work Sharing available in not only the US, but in EMEA as well. And the other thing is we've also introduced an updated save as cloud model method that makes specifying the location more efficient. More miscellaneous changes. We have now officially removed ray trace views, so those will no longer be available. And that means the kind of the associated enums have been updated as well, so that you can't, that's not an option to switch to for a ray trace view. For schedule API, the export schedule method now returns in UTF-8. I believe it previously returned in Unicode, so that may be, and the goal here is to get better formatting and kind of more updated technology for this method. And then For path of travel, we had something called path of travel calculation request type that was actually not used anywhere in the API, and now it has been deprecated. A number of electrical changes as well, basically slight modifications to methods and updates you'll have to make if you're using any of these different classes or methods, properties. And then a bunch of other replaced APIs, a few changes on geometry where we simplified things where you no longer have to call NURB spline, you can just use it on a curve. Some changes between faces and surfaces. All of this, by the way, is in the what's new documentation, so if you don't capture it here, you don't have to worry about it later. A little bit of change to e-schemas where you actually delete them from changes for images. And kind of specifying image options. And then for connection handler, we've actually created a different creation method that replaces one of the existing. And then as we say every year, the other thing is we remove all deprecated APIs. So anything that was marked deprecated in Revit 2020 has been removed. Okay, switching into the fun stuff. I'm first actually going to present a few slides to you that actually don't have any directly associated API changes, but they are things that are available and technologies that you can take advantage of through existing APIs. The first one is this void cuts geometry parameter. And that you could never previously associate this with a family type parameter. And so that made it actually really difficult to control whether a void was cutting something for a specific type or not. And so people had to duplicate content over and over again. This parameter now supports being associated with a type parameter. So you can actually start to accomplish this. You can actually create different types of families with more information. More configurable families. We're also integrating Dynamo 2.5, and the cool thing about that is that if anybody's using Dynamo and writing Dynamo scripts, you now have the Dynamo package dependency tracking, which basically says, here are all the pieces that you need, and it will actually automatically download them for you. So if you're using anything using the package manager, that will actually adapt that, understand what is missing for your script and download it automatically. So really powerful because it was kind of a pain previously to make sure that all the pieces were actually in place. We're also issuing a few Dynamo nodes together as well. So other things, tag families. So we've had this rotate with component property on a lot of tags, but it didn't actually work. So things that have 4 families that have a specific, a clearly defined plane relative how they would be oriented to an object, they now actually support rotate with component. It's still not every single tag family, and that you can find that list in the Revit documentation, but a lot more of them do support this, so you can start to make it a lot easier to tag furniture and things. And then we're also supporting bridge modeling. So what we're introducing is our new categories that support the creation of bridges and kind of infrastructure projects. We've also done some modifications to the UI to make it a little bit more friendly and filterable, so you don't have to look through all those categories if that's not something that you're using in your version of Revit. And other things that are worth mentioning for Revit Cloud Work Sharing, the plans folder will no longer be available as a place that you can initiate cloud models. So we're making this in alignment with some future developments that are going to be happening in BIM 360. So this has never been fully supported. It was kind of a poor experience, and we made the decision not to actually support that for the upcoming Revit version. And I mentioned that ray trace views were removed, and part of the reason that we removed ray trace views is we've actually created a much much better experience with realistic views, which are actually realistic. So not only are they much more performant, you also start to see real kind of shadows and experiences and effects of lights, so not only can you navigate through the model faster, but you also actually get a better perspective on what your model will look like once it's built. And then other things, we are adding generative design capability to Revit and the ability to create studies. So we'll be shipping some out of the box content. The goal here, this is all based off of Dynamo technology. So this is, the goal is to ship examples and for our customers to be able to update their studies and customize them and do exactly the thing. So it's not, Revit is not saying this is the solution for generative design. We're saying here's how you can actually build a decision about what makes sense and what are the design goals that a company has in order to be able to get to the outcome that's desired. And then there's a few new buttons that allow a person who is not familiar with Dynamo to actually execute these studies. And so we have basically opened up to a community that where you can not only generate them, but you can also use them even if you're not familiar with Dynamo. And then in terms of how it will work, you'll be able to, once options are generated, you can explore them and filter them and kind of understand what the outcomes are and make selections based on that. And then after that, push data back to Revit. Other things, so this has been a long time in the making. We now have the ability to create slanted walls. So this basically allows us, allows customer to make a wall slanted, to adjust it in canvas, and make further adjustments to the walls and alignments. And then this is where I start diving back into API. So we have the equivalent of that for the API. For the most part, there are actually no new APIs that are created for this. The one thing that you need to think about as you're coding going forward is that you can no longer make the assumption that walls are vertical. It is quite possible for a wall that's being returned to you to actually be slanted. So you have to take that into account. And then there are 3 new parameters that you need to be aware of that actually affect the slant of a wall. So the first one is the wall cross-section, and that basically says, is the wall vertical or slanted? The next one is one that defines how many degrees off from vertical is the wall slanted. And the third one, the insert orientation parameter, controls whether an insert is vertical or aligned with the wall. So other changes, we've introduced, exposed the ability to show a version GUID for a specific element. This can be really helpful because this actually changes every single time an element is updated. So if you're curious whether an element has changed between 2 versions of a model, you can compare this GUID and get that answer. So the next thing is enhancements to element filters. We've actually added 2 new filter classes for element filters. The first one is an element ID set filter, and that's just essentially a wrapper of element IDs. So you can use this in a filtered element collector if you just want to say, here are the things I want to filter to. And then another one is it visible in the view filter? So this filters out elements that are most likely visible in a view. And the key thing here is that is most likely to the best of Revit's knowledge at that point, because it is entirely possible that something else filters out an element. But to just be aware of that implementation. Again, Revit's views don't get fully generated until they're fully done. A few new events that may be helpful. So now we have the ability to make changes to a document or look at a document right before reload latest and right after reload latest. So if that's of interest to you and you're basically trying to make an operation happen on that, we now have events that support those actions. The View API has a number of new enhancements. The ability to identify whether a section view is a split section or not, and the ability to get the split region offset. So where is that split region, split crop region located? Temporary view modes are a new capability in as far as the API goes. You can actually create your own custom temporary view mode. So we use this for some of the functionality with path of travel. Basically a view mode is kind of when you have that frame around the Revit window, and then your application then can basically define what that frame is titled, what the color is, and kind of adjust the appearance of the objects in the view to your desired kind of visibility state. Another enhancement we've made to filters is the ability to view filters, has the ability to enable or disable a filter. So previously you had visibility, which controlled, if you turn that off, it hides all those objects in the view. In this case, the enable filter checkbox actually controls whether a filter applies the view overrides or not. So say a filter color codes every certain objects to red. If you turn off the enable filter setting, the elements will still be visible, but they will no longer be overridden to red. And then we have the equivalent API functions to get that information. And then another cool enhancement here is the ability to get ordered filters. So you can get the order in which filters will be applied in a view, which can be very important because you'll get different behavior depending on the order. And then another thing that we've done, so in Revit 2020.2, we released the ability to provide striped rows in schedules. However, that did not apply to sheet. So we've now extended that capability so you can actually apply the same functionality to a schedule on a sheet. And that has a few APIs. First of all, we have the ability to determine whether a schedule has striped rows or not, and define the color with which they're striped. And then you can also specify whether they appear in sheet. And then the other API we also have for schedules is the ability to freeze the header. So you can understand whether that header is frozen or not in the schedule view. Another capability is we've actually enhanced, we've provided a new sample for path of travel that starts to be coupled with Dynamo because we want to make it easy for people to understand all the different ways that they can start to use path of travel. So in this case, we provide a sample to help people identify, what's the kind of the longest length between two exit doors, and you can then go ahead and identify whether that length is too long per codes. In this case, it's 157 feet, so that's going to not meet pretty much any code anywhere. And then there is equivalent APIs for that as well. So the first, actually the first API, and this is the one I was mentioning earlier in terms of using temporary view modes, is the reveal obstacles mode. And so this actually reveals obstacles by using the analysis visualization framework to display additional thing in a temporary mode. But you also have the ability to just turn that mode on and off if you want to. In terms of tools that are used by the Dynamo script, you have a bunch of convenient methods for finding either the longest or the shortest path of travel between specified points. And then you can also, we also have exposed the ability to add waypoints to a specific path of travel. So if you want to say that a path must go through a specific point, you can go ahead and use these APIs to do that. Custom exporter events. So we have had custom exporters for a while, but now we've actually added a couple of events to let you know that a custom export is about to happen or has just happened. During this time, you can make modifications to any document, not just the active document, as long as it's not read-only. And then we've also introduced a new argument class, which provides information about which specific views are being exported. We've also provided API access to the color options for a specific view. So you can start to customize the behavior of a view and how it appears to the user, including specifying what the background color is, what color the selection is, what is the color of the object when you mouse over it, and whether a selection is transparent. So a number of different settings that are available that you can now customize the behavior and make it reflect exactly the thing you're trying to show. Also, a number of geometry enhancements. I will admit that some of the stuff starts to get above my head in terms of geometry complexity, but hopefully this is really, really helpful for you. So a number of enhancements to surfaces, including offsetting it in a specific direction, getting the UV bounding box, taking the edge of a surface and basically showing it in the 2D space, and then representing 2D curves taking from XY coordinates and representing a UV coordinates as well on that surface. Edges also have a number of enhancements, whether that edge is actually pointing in a different direction based on the face orientation to its actual parametric direction. You can start to get edge endpoints, and this is useful for understanding what other edges are connected at a specific vertex. And then you can also get the UV, basically the 2D curve representation for an edge. More geometry functionality, so updates to meshes. You can actually start to get the normal information of meshes, both the number of normals and kind of get the normal information itself. And then other geometry utilities, you can get the geometry object ID, and this is the unique identifier for a specific geometry object in its associated element. So if you want to keep something consistent from one update to another, you can actually start to use that ID to better understand that relationship. We also have math comparison utils. So we've exposed the way that Revit compares stuff internally in utils that you can actually use. So it uses Revit's internal tolerance for making that comparison. We also have transform 1D and 2D that create transforms in 1D and 2D Euclidean space. And then we have determination of whether a bounding box UV is set on or not for an object. Another area that we've made significant enhancements to is PDF import, or what was previously import and now is PDF import or link. And that actually applies to both PDF and raster images. So you'll start to see that you can use the APIs for doing both. Other enhancements that we've made is supporting load and unload for PDF and for an image. A lot of enhancements to the UI and the ability to convert between something that is imported or a link. So a lot of really cool stuff, but at the end of the day, the really important thing is now you can actually reference something that is either in a local or cloud location, and as that thing changes, it will actually get updated in Revit. A number of API enhancements come with that. First of all, images have additional properties here as we started to basically enhance the capability of images as we were reworking the dialog. So you can actually start to get the size and the resolution, the height in pixels, or just height in general. And then we have additional APIs to do those conversions that I talked about. So you can specify a source type that either creates or converts an image to a link or import. And then we have new constructors that take into consideration what type of source you have and makes different decisions. The source is basically how the image is created. The status is, an image type can have a status as well, whether it's loaded or unloaded, and you can unload it, force unload it through the API. Additionally, we have enhancements to cloud models. I mentioned that we are introducing region to model path, so that is now available. And you can also, we now have a couple of util properties that allow you to get the region names of this specific services. So in this case, we're going to have Cloud Region US and Cloud Region EMEA for the time being. So other things you can do in terms of opening cloud models, there was a case where we had to have a certain type of failure when a local model had pieces that were archived. So now you have a version archived open conflict scenario. And then you can actually resolve that using a detached from central conflict result. So if that was something that prevented opening in the past, you can actually take an automated resolution basically by detaching from the central model. In terms of coordinates, we've made a number of enhancements. One of the big things in a long time request is we have now exposed the internal origin both in the UI and the API. So you can ask a document, or I guess you can use the get method with a document to get the internal origin of the model. There's only one of these per model. And then you can actually identify what the position of that coordinate is, what the position is of the origin, and then what the shared position is relative to the project location. We've also added APIs for base point, so you can actually get the base point, the project base point, and the survey base point locations now. Other enhancements for structural assets, there is now a new property that describes whether a material is thermally treated or not. And this basically corresponds to the built-in parameter physical material param structural thermal treated, in case you were wondering. And then we've also made an enhancement to the analysis visualization framework API. And Spatial Field Manager now allows you to block interactive behaviors for AVF. By default, interactive behaviors are allowed, but if you want to specify something through the API and you don't want anybody having the dialogues that you can access, you can set this to false. And if that happens, all analysis visualization frameworks are not reachable, and you also can't delete the things that you have created. And a long list. I had to shorten this down quite a bit, despite the fact there's still quite a bit of text on here, in terms of what you can now do with mechanical analytical systems. So analytical systems are specifically designed to enable analysis at earlier stages before every single thing in a building is defined and all the systems are fully defined. So this can have two different types. This can be water or air. You can, and then depending on which one, you have two different data objects that you can reference, or two different data classes. And the first one for water loop data, it contains the data about a water loop, so you can start to see, what is the chiller type, what is the condenser water loop ID, so you can start to understand how that system is performing. And then for air systems, you kind of have a similar data structure, but with different information, including the heat exchanger type, heating coil type, and air fan type. So all the information about that system, but at an early high-level evaluation that can be used for analysis. We've also added APIs for zone equipment. And so this is kind of an early stage placeholder for providing information about a water or air system. And at the end of the day, this may be mapped to one or more physical equipment pieces. But it allows, again, this definition of definition of overall performance, and then can be mapped later once you actually start to specify that equipment. It's worth noting also that analytical spaces can be associated with one or more equipment elements, so you can basically put multiple equipment elements that are associated with the analytical space. And then you have zone equipment data that provides more information about that zone equipment object, including what type of equipment it would have, whether, hot water, cold water, and air system. Again, all that information that you would need to design a system. Then we also have system zones. So a system zone kind of is a general area that is specified, that may contain certain equipment or be powered by certain equipment, certain air systems and water loops. But the goal is to create this without having to physically model that zone. And that's really important because it allows, again, that idea of early calculation before anything has actually been detailed too far into the design. So you can, from a generic zone object, so it's called a system zone, but in the API it's a generic zone, you can get the boundaries, and then you can get the information about the domain as well. And then you also have a system zone data object, and that can give you a list of the equipment in that zone. Then moving on a little bit to systems analysis and analysis reports. So you can actually get, we now have an API to view the systems analysis report. And it's worth pointing out that system analysis report, there can be multiple reports in a model. So if you use this method called get latest systems analysis report, that will return the latest report that's available, and then that is actually the report that will be powering the peak heating and cooling loads in an energy analysis spaces. So that is going to be the report that's going to be used for that. And then we also have systems analysis options that contain properties for workflow files, output folders, and weather files that can have an impact on the systems analysis. So we've now exposed this. And continuing on our general analysis, 5 slides, I think, we have new enhancements to GBXML export options. You can now export analytical systems, so that controls whether analytical systems are included as part of the GBXML or not. And then we also have a couple of application settings enhancements that control systems analysis, workflow names, and workflows. And so those basically specify the name and the path information for names for those systems. This is a really, really small text, so please don't read it here. But what we have is we've spent a lot of time enhancing electrical capability. And that is also reflected in electrical APIs. So you can, not only do we have enhancements to circuit naming, including kind of new circuit naming scheme classes and circuit naming scheme settings. But you can also see that we have so many different properties and that are available as part of electrical systems, electrical equipment, panel schedules. So a lot of different customization that you can do through the API. What we've been trying to do is we've been trying to take the electrical capability and make it less US-centric and more open, which means that there's a lot more flexibility and configuration power that's illustrated by these methods. And then we also have some enhancements to structural connections. Some connections require more points kind of than the default. So now we have the ability to define a specific connection input point and then to make that available as part of a structural connection handler. So we now have more flexibility in terms of the complexity of connections that can be created with structural connections in Revit. And then switching over a little bit to reinforcement, a lot of work and reinforcement again, enhancements to rebar constraints, basically more control over how rebar constraints behave and the spacing and whether, and the kind of distances between bars. And then we also have a new method to return all the possible rebar constraints that can be associated with a specific handle. We have the ability to control the end treatment of a rebar. And you can basically set the idea of what the actual treatment type will be at the end of a specified bar. More enhancements around fabric sheets and whether it is visible or obscured in a view and whether it's solid or not. We have the ability to control the out of plane rotation angles for rebar, so that basically that says, okay, is the what's the angle of the hook rotation of that bar? And I believe that's possible now at the individual bar definition. And then we also have hook length override, so you can basically override for a specific bar what is the length of the hook at the end. And then a couple of other things to note. We are planning on doing a design automation API update to support the latest engines, so that will be available. And then in terms of BIM 360 design, we are upgrading to, we are planning to update to the latest version for cloud model upgrade as well. That one may be delayed a little bit beyond global launch due to the complexity associated with changes we're making in cloud work sharing this year. And then last but not least, I wanted to just basically say, hey, Forge accelerators are coming up. So if you're looking to build new technology, especially if you're looking to build a design automation API, these are a great opportunity. It's worth pointing out that Boston is always a great location to attend because that is where the design automation team is located, actually a lot of the Revit team. So think about that as you're developing things. There's always opportunities to interact directly with us. We'd love to help you out. With that, is there any questions?
Thank you, Sasha. So there was one question.
Okay, so there was a question. So in terms of recompiling code, there's only one issue with the API. It looks like image import options are missing. I don't know, but I expect. I'd have to look back and look at that team to see what exactly. I assume it's been replaced if it's been removed, but I wouldn't know what it would be replaced with. So we can look into that.
So this will be a good one to submit at the beta forum?
Yes, that'd be fantastic.
Okay.
Is it possible to get document from BIM 360 Cloud Path. I don't believe that we have introduced any new API to support that. So are you trying to, in getting the document, are you saying, is it possible to open a cloud model? So I guess.
Yeah, so it might be, so Sajad, could you send an email to us, either Augusto or me? It could be, I saw Sasha talking about GUI ID for the document in a project, right? So if we have that, we may be able to get a document, I mean, separately using a Forge. But this question, could be from Revit desktop side. So we need to see.
Yep. Any additions to work with the new rendering capabilities? So there's no additions, I believe, to the API, primarily because this replaces our realistic views. So in terms of, I don't think that there are any new settings, but I would have to double check that there aren't.
Hello, did we lose Sasha?
I'm here.
Oh, you're okay.
I think she is mute. Yeah, okay.
No, I'm looking, I don't see any more questions, right?
I think there's something, so okay, thanks, so it's okay. And capabilities. Okay, so sorry, I was typing the one answer to one question. So there is another one, like application background open. What is this?
I think that was the answer to the previous question.
Ah, okay. Okay, so then allow me to dismiss this since we answered. Answer live, probably. Any other questions?
Where are all the electrical system updates focused on internationalization? So I think what you see, in terms of electrical, there's nothing specifically targeted that is international. It's just a additional flexibility to what you can do with electrical systems, which would allow people to take advantage of it. So I think in terms of anything that we're developing, all the APIs get associated with the changes that we're making.
Thank you.
So yeah, so there was a question here, do we have any updates on electrical panel schedules? Yeah, there are a few small enhancements. I would just take a look at the documentation. But I think there's a few settings, but I think electrical panel schedules are probably going to be a thing that we're going to be working on for a little bit. And then can we expect code samples on any of these API additions? I would expect yes, but I don't actually know the answer. So typically we leave that up to the teams, whether they think a code change is complicated enough. So if there's actually anything specifically that you would like to see a sample on, that would be really helpful to know, because if it does not exist.
Okay, great. Any others? Five more seconds. No. Okay, then thank you very much, Sasha, and then all the attendees and Augusto as well earlier for the Civil 3D. Okay, thanks to Sasha for your answers.
Can you stop the recording?
Yes, let me do this.
Yes, thank you.